When I was in serving a congregation in Toledo, Ohio, not too far away was a great Indian restaurant. I like Indian food. I like spicy stuffs, and so that's often where I'd go for lunch. It was owned by a gentleman who had immigrated from India to this country, and he and his wife were just great hosts. They made great meals, and it was always a great conversation. Usually by the time I would get there in the afternoon, most of the folks, the busy rush of the business crowd, the 12 to 1 folks that have to take their lunch because that's what somebody told them in their job, and so they were all gone, and so I would get there about 1:30 and just be able to sit and eat and talk. And he and I got to be good friends along the way. I was in there one afternoon having my lunch with him, and he said, "My daughter is getting married." Oh, wow, we celebrated that. His daughter had graduated from Harvard Medical School and was doing her residency, and she was marrying a gentleman who had graduated, another doctor from Johns Hopkins, and they were both of Indian descent. So we talked about that. He knew I was pastor of a Christian community, and so we talked about gathering for worship and doing marriage services and everybody coming. And he said, we've got the whole family coming from India. Aunts and uncles, and all those folks are coming from India for this event. And I said, really? That's impressive. And then we talked a little more about that, and he said, you know what that means for me and my family? And I said, no, it sounds like you're going to have a lot of celebration going on. He said, yes, that's true. But for us and in our tradition, my wife and I have paid for all of their flights here and back. And while they're here, it'll be about a month that they are here. They're coming early. They'll be here for about a month, and it's our responsibility to feed them for a month. And it's our responsibility to provide their wedding garments. Those beautiful saris that the women wear, and expensive stuff. It's our responsibility as family to do that. We know something about that from Scripture. There's so many instances in Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament, that deal with what? Eating together. Where Jesus eats with folks, where Moses eats with folks, where the great prophets eat with folks, where people enjoy food together around the table. We have that story from the New Testament of Jesus going to a wedding, and what happens? What happened at the wedding? Come on. They ran out of wine. And because they run out of wine, Jesus' mother comes to him and what? What? Yeah. Well, no, she comes to him and says, we were out of wine. Yeah. And Jesus says, not my business. Yes, it was. Because as members of the family, they were responsible for what? Taking care of all the guests. And so, yes, it was Jesus' responsibility to do something. His mother points that out to him. Remember who you are. We've all had moms say that to us. Remember who you are. Don't be doing anything out there that would embarrass me as your mother. I don't want to hear about it from the neighbors. Okay? So Jesus turns the water to wine. And they celebrate that, and it becomes a statement of miracle and wondrousness of talking about God's kingdom. There was another issue going on, and that's what I want to touch on this morning, and it's not going to be real long. And that issue is being responsible for the people who you eat with. If you've invited somebody to your house and they've eaten a meal at your house, now you are responsible for them until that food passes through their body. That was part of the Old Testament and New Testament tradition. Now, think about that for a minute. Of all of those people you like to eat with, that you invite to your house, how many of them do you want to be responsible for until the food passes through their body? Teachers today have a new thing to think about. I mean, in the past, it was having your lesson plans ready. In the past, it was getting yourself together. In the past, it was a matter of trying to figure out how to relate to the students in your classroom. Today, every teacher that walks into a classroom, no matter where it is in this country, one of the things that's got to be in the back of their mind is, am I willing to sacrifice my life for these children who are in my classroom? If somebody comes in here with a gun and decides to start shooting, that's a very different way of thinking about who you are and what you do. I mean, our firefighters do that all the time, don't they? Our first responders, our police, the sheriff's department, people in the military. Am I willing to sacrifice my life? Well, if you invited somebody to eat with you and your house was attacked, it was your responsibility. Your tent was attacked there in the desert. It was your responsibility to stand and defend them at the cost of your own life. Of those people who you invite to eat in your house, how many of them are you willing to do that for? You know, you got to make up your mind in advance. Jesus did, and the folks of his day, when they opened their house and said, come on in. That's quite a responsibility. What happens if they got sick in your house? If they had a heart attack or a stroke or had something else go wrong? Medically, you would be responsible for paying their medical bills. Because as they ate with you, they became part of your household. They became part of your family. And just like your own children, you were then responsible for them. I wonder how many of us would think differently as we put together an invitation list of folks we were going to have over if that kind of weight was upon us. Are there some folks that you invited to your house that you, given this issue of being responsible for, you would have thought, nah, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. Well, you see what Jesus does. As they sit at table with one another, and he's the host, and they have come to be with him in the meal, as he feeds them, it becomes what? His responsibility to care for them. And not only is it his responsibility to care for them, but because we eat the meal with Jesus, Jesus accepts responsibility for caring for who? Us. We may make different choices as we think about who to invite to the meal in our house if we knew we had to be responsible for them. But Jesus makes no distinction. Anybody who eats this meal with me is one with me, and I am with them. I had a little kid who was sitting with his sister as we were preparing for First Communion, and we were talking about bread and wine and body and blood and all of that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, in the midst, I love little kids when they do this. He said, "I get it." I said, "Oh, okay, tell us what you get." He said, "If you separate body and blood, you die." He'd evidently seen that on TV or when he was playing games out in the backyard of cowboy and Indians or soldiers. You die. But if you put the body and the blood back together, then you're alive. So Jesus, this is this little 5-year-old. So Jesus then is alive in us when the body and the blood come together. Jesus invites us to the dinner table, invites us to come and eat, share, and celebrate. And by doing that, makes a commitment to be one with us, to take responsibility for us, and to care for us. Thanks be to God.